Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hi. We
Well,
got a lot of people coming in.
Yep. Hello, everyone. We've got people joining us, but I want to make sure we get started. We're recording the session. My name is Jessica Hunsden, and I'm a program coordinator here at Rutgers. And I wanted to introduce our presenters today and have them get started. We're really grateful you're here. Kanika Chopra is here today from Scotch Plains Fanwood Public Schools, and Anthony Farag from Westfield Public Schools. So we're really excited to hear what you have to tell us today.
thank you so much for the introduction, Jessica. It's so nice to see some familiar names, and it's so nice to have everyone here. I am an English teacher at Scotch Plains Fanwood High School. I've been teaching here for 7 years now, and I recently just finished my doctorate along with Anthony at Rutgers University this past year. So I'm going to turn it over to my co-presenter to tell us a little bit about himself.
Yeah, thank you, Kanika, and thank you, Jessica. Yeah, welcome to everybody. My name is Anthony Farag. I just finished my doctorate along with Kanika and a few months ago, and I've been teaching at Westfield for 16 years. And the essence of this presentation centers around our experiences as people of color in predominantly white districts. Both Scotch Plains and Westfield are predominantly white districts. I think Scotch Plains has roughly a 68% white and Westfield's 85% white. And we'll be talking about that throughout. I am ethnically Egyptian and the only person of color in my department, my social studies department at my school. So that comes with a whole lot of experiences that we'll be talking about.
And I think that one of the things that is the hallmark of both of our works is that we speak from a point of being in white spaces and wrestling with the responsibilities of being in white spaces and thinking about how many well-intentioned colleagues we work with. And that brought us to conversations around Bettina Love's book. And we kind of used that as a platform for this presentation. So we're going to be talking a little bit about allyship, co-conspiratorship, and figuring out the gray area in between those. In order to make this as interactive as possible, we're going to ask you to go to joinpd.com and enter the code that you're seeing right now. Joinpd.com and enter the code that's currently being presented, TLNMDS. We have a couple of people connected. We're just going to wait on a few more folks to join us. Ideally, we'd be in a shared space where we could all talk and bounce ideas off of each other. But this will do for now.
Yeah, this will have to do for now. And hopefully it's as interactive as we're hoping for.
We have about half of us in so far.
Okay, good.
So if you haven't joined yet, please go ahead and join pd.com using the code TLNMDS. We are counting on you for a great deal of this presentation. So we'd love to have you in partnership there.
Yeah. We have polls, we have interactive questions, hoping to get as many people kind of involved so we can have a great conversation as we go through it. All right.
Okay, it looks like most of us are there, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So we talked a little bit about being people of color in our institutions, and when we first started brainstorming this session, some of the things that we came across were conversations about how we felt, but also conversations about how colleagues have shared their feelings with us and things that they've experienced. So Anthony, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about that first bullet point.
Oh yeah, so like every single time in my experience, if there was an issue surrounding race or racial inequality or things like that, the eyes in my department meetings would kind of go towards me. I've kind of been involved in a lot of the discussions. People look to me to kind of help them process some of the racial issue or the issues regarding teaching about racism and racial discrimination and white privilege in social studies education in a predominantly white institution. So I always feel like I'm under a microscope in that regard. And like we have noted here, Kanika and I, we talk about the idea and the feeling that we have this pressure of speaking for all minorities and without having, in a way, the privilege of being an individual in that sense, in that space. A lot of people who are, you know, in white contexts, if they're white, they get to speak for themselves. Whereas when you're a minority in a white space, many times you have the pressure of speaking for everybody, which is not really an accurate representation of how millions and millions of people think.
Definitely something that we kind of experience, being able to speak for Black, Indigenous people of color across the board. And like Anthony mentioned, we don't share those experiences. Everyone, even within a particular ethnic group, has different practices. So that obligation to feel like we have to speak for everyone is definitely something that's taxing on not just us, but our peers in this work. Another thing that we feel is often happening is that we're charged with kind of the responsibility to educate white folk on anti-racism. So whenever anti-racism initiatives are sparked in the district, or those conversations begin even outside of the district, people often turn to us to lead the charge there. And I think part of that is the need to feel like it's not white folk leading white folk. But I think our challenge with that circles back to, we don't speak for everyone. And the interesting thing is, in a lot of the work that I find myself doing in my district, I find myself having to reassure people that they're doing a good job. And I find myself having to edit emails to students and make sure that like nothing is coming across as racist. And I think that that's such an interesting approach to taking, to consider the ways that we lay burden on our Black and brown colleagues, thinking about how when we do diversify the workforce, the responsibilities that we have to be able to recognize and celebrate their differences, but also to recognize the fact that they don't speak for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So Kanika, I think a couple more people joined. I don't know if we want to allow anybody to kind of join the Pear Deck to get as much data as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll throw that back up there.
Yeah, real quick. Anybody who's just joined, please go to joinpd.com, enter that code so we can get on the polls that we have and the questions that we have as much feedback from you guys as possible.
Because while we're starting from a place of our experiences, we're also really curious about the experiences that you bring to the table and the experiences you've had that have led you to this session and to this workshop.
Yeah.
We've acquired one more person. I'll take it.
Give it another couple of seconds.
Sure. So if you're just joining us, please join us on this Pear Deck by going to joinpd.com and entering the code that's currently presented.
Okay. Maybe I could put it in the chat. Joinpd.com. What was the code? Oh yeah. Okay, so Jessica, you're on that. Nice. Okay. All right, perfect. So the first question that we want you guys, you folk to kind of think about was the racial demography of the high school that you attended. And it should be, you should have the ability to actually answer. Okay, got 12 people. Ooh, interesting. Wow, interesting. This is like correlating exactly with my research that we'll talk about later. New Jersey being very, very racially segregated. Equally diverse, there's nobody.
We're going to move into another question that asks you to investigate how many teachers of color you had in your primary and secondary schooling.
Try to remember. Oh, interesting. Oh, that's very interesting. So the big chunk is just one, it looks like. All right, the next question, how many social studies teachers of color did you have in your primary and secondary schooling? Now, specifically in the discipline that should talk about race and racial discrimination and equality, how many teachers of color did you have?
That's telling.
Yep.
And now we're going to think about kind of a content area that really focuses on empathy and a content area that focuses on diverse perspectives. So how many ELA teachers of color did you have in your primary and secondary schooling?
Hmm.
How often were you assigned a book or a piece of literature written by a person of color throughout high school? And I think as we move through these questions, we're starting to recognize the central issue here.
The next question, now, not outside of formal schooling, how often did you read texts authored by people of color outside of school? And that's more of like your own kind of experience outside of school, seeing how it can compare and contrast with the former question.
I think this is the least predictable of the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Ooh, interesting. So a bit of a contrast, don't we?
Mm-hmm. And this might allude to the fact that maybe the texts we read early on really set the precedent for what we end up picking up and reading down the road.
Yeah.
At this point, we're going to ask you to enter some text and reflect on your immediate reaction to the results of the poll. Were you surprised? Were you not surprised? Were there some pressing thoughts or concerns that surfaced for you? What are your immediate reactions to this? So as we've kind of started to finish our reflections, I'm taking a look at them. I'm not going to project them, but one of the things that I think is coming up as a commonality, a theme of our reactions, is that we are a little bit concerned about the nature of these results. We are reflecting on our own practice. We're thinking about what's the cause of this, who's to blame, right? That's kind of the nature of our questions and our reflections. And these are the same questions that drove us to our research and to investigate the state of education and how that correlates to other things in New Jersey and locally in our towns. Our research shows us that hate crimes and bias incidents in New Jersey have drastically increased since 2018. So in 2019, there was a 65% increase. We've earned a total of 944 bias incidents. This may, in part, be the result of more reporting and more awareness, but regardless of that, I think that's kind of a stark number and forces us to reflect a little bit on our own practice and the institutional forces at play here that are creating space for these hate crimes and bias incidents. Interestingly, more than a quarter of the reported bias incidents occurred at colleges and universities, and nearly half of the offenders were minors, which raises questions about how high schools are creating spaces that are diverse enough and inclusive enough to educate students, right? And that sometimes begins with our faculty and our staff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like secondary schooling is having some kind of impact on either people's awareness or lack of awareness. You look at the basic, hate crime data, as you're saying, Kanika, being minors and college aged. Something's going on there.
Mm-hmm. And right now you're just seeing the same troubling headlines that we're all seeing in the news about issues with swastikas and blackface and racist graffiti. And both of us had schools that were targeted by these instances, which really forced us to pool our resources and think about ways that we could be better educators for our students.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in regards to the research that I did for my dissertation, it also pointed out some of the bigger problems in the way it's the quantifying the social studies education throughout all of New Jersey, seeing some of the gaps and problems in the way we actually educate. So what my study did was I studied social studies teachers in predominantly white districts and described them statistically. And it turned out that 94.2% of teachers in these districts were white. 89.9% grew up with a town with 70% or higher white population, and 82.7% never had a social studies teacher of color. So the teachers of white students across all of New Jersey are white themselves, grew up in extremely white towns, and never had a social studies teacher of color, which could suggest that the way many schools are approaching education is that they would end up hiring, especially in predominantly white schools, they end up hiring mostly white teachers, especially in social studies, who have never really interacted with a teacher of color that they could emulate when they're developing their pedagogy for social studies education in the secondary school level. So if we are really thinking about these issues structurally, we have these issues where fundamentally in predominantly white schools, the teachers of white students are white themselves, and they grow up in predominantly white towns, almost reproducing the racial segregation that's been going on throughout the entire country and also in New Jersey. And specifically in the case of New Jersey is a very, very diverse state on the whole, but very segregated at the same time. So when we look at the problems in New Jersey, we can kind of see it numerically, how it's playing out, and could suggest some of the causes of some of these issues regarding hate crimes and the way we, the issues we're trying to solve as educators.
And I think that when we reflect on the fact that we're trying to solve these issues as educators, we are pushed to consider our own identities and our own roles in these spaces. And for a long time, up until this summer, I really considered myself an ally, and I took pride in being an ally. And it wasn't until we talked, Anthony and I reflected on our reading of Bettina Love's book, We Want to Do More Than Just Survive, that we realized that allyship is no longer enough. And I'm going to share with you a clip of Bettina Love speaking about this. She just puts it so eloquently. So I'm going to go ahead and present this for us.
start.
Yeah. And as we start with Black women, we know that no movement is done alone. And so again, thank you for giving us language. The next question is for both of you. You talk about, you make the move from allyship to co-conspiratorship. So the question I want you to sit with is, can you identify, once Dr. Love gives us a definition, can you identify a co-conspirator that you've had in your work? And can you break down for us this difference between an ally and a co-conspirator?
Yeah, so
I bet you can.
So, you know, the book is about this idea of abolitionist teaching, right? And so, shout out to upstate New York. I'm from upstate New York. You know, we don't like New Yorkers, but that's okay. When you from upstate New York, like, where are you from? You know, I'm from upstate. Queens? No. I'm from upstate New York, Rochester, New York, 90 miles from Canada, right? And so, you know, so we had abolitionists in upstate New York. That's where I grew up. And the one thing about an abolitionist had to be a co-conspirator. I mean, I want y'all for a second to just think about the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad freed over 100,000 enslaved Africans and Black folks. There was no Twitter. There was no Facebook. There was no Instagram. This was all off trust and love of each other. And to say that this system of racism and bondage, no more.
Yeah.
We did that. It was everyday people. Farmers, bankers, doctors, teachers, nurses, all ethnicities. We did that as a country. Someone came to your door, gave you a code, you just had to trust them. And so I wanted to bring that back. What would it mean for us in 2019 to think about what it would mean to be an abolitionist and to be a co-conspirator? And in the book, I use James Tyson. Now, many people are not familiar with who James Tyson is. You know Bree Newsom. Bree Newsom was the young Black woman who took that Confederate flag down in South Carolina 8 days after Dylann Roof went into the AME church. And I tell the story in the book because I think it's an important story because Bree Newsom and James Tyson did not know each other. There were some folks who got together and said, that flag is coming down. They said, and a Black woman's gonna take it down. They taught Bree how to climb. They had Bree's bail money ready. That morning, Bree Newsom and James Tyson were at an IHOP. They got the word, come take the flag down. Bree Newsom climbs up on the pole to take the flag down. Now, this is where the difference between an ally and a co-conspirator is. James Tyson, now there's a gate for the flagpole. James Tyson isn't standing like outside the gate. Okay, like, Bree, they coming, Bree. Like, Bree. No, James Tyson, he is inside. And then the police say, you know what? We can get her down. Tase the pole. James Tyson, because he wasn't here, he was here, said, okay. He put his hand on the pole. That white man at that moment understood why he was there. He put his hand on the pole, and he knew that the police would not tase that pole with a white man, healthy white man, right there. He saved her life. That's what it means to be an ally. You can stand out there. And allies know all the language. They read all the books. They come to the meeting with all the terms. Right? They read the report before you read the report. Right? I always say allies make Black folks feel bad. Like, did you read the new Ta-Nehisi Coates book? Yeah, I didn't read the new Ta-Nehisi Coates book. Like, you know, I've been busy being Black. I didn't read the new Ta-Nehisi Coates book, but I know it's fire. Right? So they come and they know everything and they good. And then after the meeting, you're like, well, what we gonna do? They go, you like, hey, they left already? Where'd they go?
I'm gonna call
I tell folks all the time, whiteness is like a bank. And it just, your ATM card just replenishes itself. So spend it. As the kids say, cash out. Right, cash out. It's gonna come right back. And so to be a co-conspirator, I try to write in the book, is to take risks for somebody. To put something on the line, but to use it in a way in which when you're using your privilege.
Yes.
Use it. And I'm not just talking about white folks, I'm talking about cisgender folks. Use it for trans folks, like use it for queer folks. Like put something on the line, take a risk. It doesn't have to be small risk, big risk. James Tyson simply said here, put his hand on the pole. And that's what we are talking about with co-conspirators. Allies, they know everything, they can say, they can talk it. But when it's time, they're not there. And if they're there, they're looking at you like, you going? Oh, you going. You on the front lines, right? Black folks and brown folks, we don't want to fight racism. The Creator did not put me here to fight racism.
Yeah.
If you believe that, that's racist. Full life and be my full self and my full human.
Yes.
But I gotta fight. What y'all created. So they gotta come to the table with something more than just I read the new book.
Right.
Right. Take a risk.
So the enthusiasm with which she carries this message always stays with me. I never tire of hearing her voice. I had the good fortune of having Bettina Love crash a book club that was about her book this summer, and there were students in the book club, and she spent the entire time lifting up student voices. You know, she didn't really want to talk about her book. She wanted to talk about what they thought of her book, and she was such a co-conspirator in that sense, because she was lifting them up and putting her power to the side in that moment, even though she knew that most people in that book club wanted to hear from her. She took that time to lift up the voices of the students that were there. She talks a lot about allyship and co-conspiratorship, and it wasn't until, I read the book, I was doing my book reading, and I was thinking a little bit about how I could change the role that I play. And what she talks about is that allyship is performative, where co-conspirators are participatory. They put themselves on the line. They are willing to sacrifice something, whereas allies are willing to do the reading. They're willing to do the intellectual work, but maybe not exactly the work that requires action. They might play it safe, whereas co-conspirators are risk takers. And circling back to what we opened up with, allies seek reassurance, and co-conspirators use their whiteness to cash out for others. They're looking to be able to do what they can, recognizing, like she said, that whiteness is a bank, it replenishes itself. I just love her.
Yeah, and as you said, I mean, you told me about the book, Kanika, and I read it. It's a phenomenal book, highly recommended. And one of the things as an educator that we talked a lot about, in our spaces, in our areas where we have a lot of power, we have the ability to kind of use our ability to shift our mentality from being an ally to a co-conspirator, but it comes with a lot of specifically educational aspects, which I guess we could talk about a little bit here. For me personally, Westfield was in local, statewide, and national news in the past year because of the course that is currently being offered, that I'm currently teaching actually, called Power, Privilege, and Imbalance in American Society, in which it's been, it was very controversial before the Board of Education and its passing, and there was a lot of people arguing back and forth regarding if it should actually be used or taught in the school. And I remember last year being kind of scared for my own job and my own career, being on the front line, involved in both creating the course and currently teaching the course. So in my own personal experience, I'm reflecting on that kind of explanation or the idea of being an ally versus a co-conspirator. In developing this course, in a way, I almost sacrificed my career, to the point where the Board of Education would look at me with a specific kind of lens, and all it would take is a shift in the way the Board of Education is operating politically or identifying politically, and then the magnifying glass would be on me. And that was part of the local and national controversy involved with creating this course. And Kanika, we talked about the simple fact of our own existence as educators in predominantly white schools, showing especially white students the ability of somebody who could maybe break a stereotype that could been feeding into their heads outside of school or even in school. Me being an Egyptian American, teaching about 9/11, teaching about the issues in the Middle East and all the complicated nature of things surrounding the war on terror that we've all been kind of inundated with for the past few decades. My simple existence allows me to be an abolitionist educator as I break apart some of the stereotypes that many students come into school and operate with that are given to them by outside media, etc. And finally, in regards to the curriculum, as an educator, this is where I think a lot of the sacrifice is necessary in thinking about what to keep, what to take away, whose story to tell, and how we can either sacrifice something we know very, very well and take it out of the curriculum, and instead study something brand new that is very challenging, that requires a lot of mental, emotional, intellectual effort to be able to help, especially white students or especially students, you know, your own students, wherever you are, to understand reality in a better way that is not clouded by the issues of white supremacy, racial discrimination, etc. And specifically develop curriculum and lesson plans and unit plans that directly attack and are co-conspirators or conspirating, I don't know if that's the right word, against white supremacy, which is the goal. And it's not necessary, it's very different from the way a lot of people understand how to attack white supremacy by diversity education or trying to fit in stories of people of color or issues surrounding people of color. Instead, it's directly attacking white supremacy at its core by understanding the way society works, and that's in the way that white supremacy is holding everybody back, which could require a significant sacrifice.
And I think it really does come back to self-evaluation, right? And I liked your point about using your existence, leveraging your existence, and even if you're not a person of color, right, leveraging that existence to be an abolitionist educator, because you could still be somebody who models the thought process of recognizing one's own privilege. In terms of changes to the curriculum, this is always challenging, and oftentimes it requires getting approval on a number of levels. But I think that we could also think about it in the ways that we supplement the curriculum. Think about it in terms of the articles we showcase. It doesn't have to always be large-scale texts that are being brought in, but whose voices are being brought in to begin with. One of the challenges I faced was getting my dissertation study off the ground that focused on anti-racist work and empathy in a predominantly white school district. I was forced to and challenged with reframing it so that it was palatable to other community members and parents and students and the Board of Education. It went through 3 rounds of edits to be able to have it be something that could be launched. And a lot of the texts that I used had to be grant funded because they weren't part of our curriculum yet, and now they are, right? So it's about being able to make those changes at any cost. We're not gonna have you write this down, so you can just kind of reflect on it in the interest of time. So reflect on a time when you had the institutional power to be a co-conspirator, the institutional power to do something but failed to do so, and kind of think about the barriers that were present for you. And we're going to give you a minute to think about this, maybe jot an idea down if you need to, because momentarily we're going to put you in breakout groups to discuss your responses to this. And I know that sometimes these memories don't come back to us. They're not as easily accessible because we don't like to remember the moments in which we could have done more. But I think it really does afford us a great deal of clarity. So at this point, we're going to ask Jessica to funnel you out into breakout groups. You're going to share your reflections and brainstorm a list of barriers, maybe barriers that you experienced or barriers altogether to co-conspiratorship, and come up with ways to overcome those barriers, things that you could do to possibly support your colleagues in overcoming those barriers or prepare yourself to overcome them as well.
Don't forget to unmute yourselves when you are in your breakout room so you can talk to each other.
This is Jessica, and I've got 2 rooms ready to go with 7 people in each room. And I'm going to open all the rooms, and I did make sure that everybody could unmute themselves. So I think we're ready to go.
Let's take 7 minutes for the breakout room then.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
I'll open all rooms now, and then I'll close them in 7 minutes. And I am still recording. And would you like me to go to a group, or I'll stay out here? You know what? I'm going to stay outside so that I can send messages to everybody.
Do you think that we should stay outside as well just to give them some time to reflect, or do you think we should enter the rooms as well?
I think it's totally up to you.
Okay.
What do you think, Kanika?
I think I might give them the space to reflect.
Yeah, me too. I was thinking the same thing. All right, so then they'll come back at what time?
At 48, so 55. If we said 7 minutes, 55.
And then we'll just do the Q&A, right? And then we're done, we're good to go?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Great. And I'll just at the very end remind everybody to fill out their form and go to the next session, their conference feedback form.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Yeah,
And there's no way to stop the recording, and I actually don't think it records inside the group. So
That's fine.
but feel free to turn off your camera or mute yourself or whatever you'd like to do. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself.
I'm going to run to the bathroom, forgot time.
Oh, Kanika, I do want to tell you, I just noticed something, that it put both of you in one group because it automatically, so there may be one group with just 5 people, just 3 people in it, and the other group has 6. I just noticed it right now.
Oh, that's okay.
Okay.
No.
I didn't think of it until the fact that it puts all of us in a group, except for me, I guess. It put you in a group, you and
Correct. No worries.
It's too bad so many people came in later. It would have been interesting to look at the pair deck.
Mm-hmm.
With more people. Karima joined us, it looked like.
Really? Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah. So Joan and Karima are with us. I think when is her? I think her session's next week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess we'll just see whatever questions they have.
Yeah.
A bunch of people, so should be interesting. But yeah, even though the Pear Deck polls were like exactly what we expected to be, just crazy.
Small sample.
Yeah, even with a small sample. I don't know, you want to do a t-test for fun?
I was just going to say too, I think we wanted people to come back at 55. We decided, right? So I'm going to I'm going to actually close the room because it gives 60 seconds once you close the rooms, right? So I'm going to send a message right now. I'm going to say we will be coming back to the main room in 1 minute and then close the rooms.
All right, perfect.
So all participants now have been given 60 seconds to leave their breakout rooms. So
nice.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, you're the best.
I meant to start earlier with a welcome. I was admitting everyone all, but
Oh, no, it's all good.
Is great. I'm really learning so much too. So happy to be here.
Yeah, you're the best, Jessica.
And I see we have some people coming back to the main room, I think, too.
I know I hit my button too soon.
No, it's all good.
Talking and I accidentally hit it. Oh, no.
No worries.
That's okay.
I have to apologize to my group.
So guys, the last 5 minutes, we'll just take questions, have a bit of a discussion. Yeah.
One of the things with Pear Deck that I don't love is that it shows that responses are completed even when folks are still typing.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, so it'll look like it's done, but they're still mid-type.
Oh.
So if I show screen, it'll show you like someone's still finishing their thought, but at least it picks it up at the end.
And I think we have everyone back now.
Excellent.
Nice.
So we wanted to make sure that we brought everyone back in time to be able to answer any questions, address any lingering thoughts that you might have, and fulfill kind of the questions you might have about abolitionist education or being co-conspirators, or just questions you might have about your own experiences. So under the Q&A, you might see a space where you can add any questions, generate your thoughts, and we will share the screen in a moment so that we could arrange some time to reflect on that.
Glad.
I know we're running short on time.
Yeah, I wish we had more time. There's so much to talk about.
I'm interested. We've been talking a lot in my district. It's a white district. We have no staff of color, no professional staff of color. All of our staff of color are on the custodial staff. And so we've been working on this for years and I've not been able to get any traction, not been able to solve. And so I'm worried about our efforts and how they might now tokenize anybody that we do bring in as teachers of color. So I'm not looking for a solution. I'm just naming there's a concerted effort, and I'm worried about the harm that effort could actually cause as well on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the chief barriers for a lot of, because people of color who are going into a predominantly white, whatever institution, they have that fear. We have that fear of being tokenized. And then the misconceptions, the stereotypes surrounding our simple existence in a white space. Again, a huge burden and a barrier, and not something easy to be solved without like a concerted effort from every level of schooling to facilitate and make things easier for people of color to be in positions in whatever district where they could be educators.
And I think that maybe one of the solutions to that, one of the things I'm pushing for in my school district is to partner with HBCUs to see if teachers that are graduating from those schools are looking to get student teaching gigs at our building. One of the challenges is that the new changes to the student teaching program and responses has made it even more challenging to actually get teachers to be student teachers, because there's all these loops they have to jump through to become student teachers in districts. So especially this time of year, it makes it really difficult, but it would be helpful to partner with organizations that could support that initiative. Other thoughts and questions, feel free to just unmute your mic at this point.
Yeah. One other big barrier, for example, in Westfield, if you're a graduate of Westfield High School, you automatically get an interview to become a teacher. And if it's a predominantly white school, you're pooling from a predominantly white population, and that facilitates, more and more white teachers to be in these schools. So, traditions like that, or like practices like that across different districts, just facilitate the constant whiteness of the teaching staff of predominantly white schools. So those are, other barriers and struggles people have to change institutionally if people really want to care about diversifying the workforce.
And I think that something to think about is that this is an uphill battle. We aren't going to solve it in one moment. We're not going to acquire the staff or the population, but we can change the culture gradually and reflect on the ways in which we present ourselves. And I think that's why allyship and co-conspiratorship become really important things to think about, because the way that we present ourselves really sets the tone for the adults that our students go on to be, and the standards that our colleagues hold themselves to. So I know that we have to let you go at this point so you can rush off to your next session, but we want to thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Oh, I'm sorry, Anthony, I didn't want to cut you off.
Oh, it's all good. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I wanted to make sure you know that this session is recorded, and also that we really appreciate your feedback at the end of the second session in the conference feedback form. So you should have the list of the next sessions that are, next sessions that are being offered, and you can go to that session. That session will start at, I believe, 4:05.
And I want to give a huge shout out to Jessica. Thank you so much for helping us think through this and facilitating this for us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I'm so glad that I could be here to learn from you both too.